In 1994, 8 people entered a hospital scanner carrying memories that could make their hearts race, 13 years after the danger had ended. The machine was enormous, the images were blurry, the computer had roughly the processing power and bedside manner of a parking meter. But when the researchers replayed each person's traumatic memory, 3 things appeared on the scan. The brain's alarm system flared, the visual system behaved as if it were seeing the event again, and part of the language system went quiet. Not metaphorically quiet, measurably quiet. The memory could still accelerate a heart, it could still flood the body, it could still project pictures. But the machinery needed to turn that experience into a neat beginning, middle, and end was suddenly bringing office printer energy to a 5-alarm fire. Paper jam, cyan low. Please describe your terror after restarting the device. So why can a person know that an event is over, yet feel it happening now? And why does the sentence "just talk about it" sometimes ask the brain to use the exact tool that trauma has temporarily unplugged? The answer began with a radioactive tracer, a tape recorder, and the first crude weather map of a brain caught in a flashback. Before brain imaging, scientists could measure chemicals and electrical signals, but watching a living human brain redistribute its activity during a specific mental event was extraordinarily difficult. PET scanning changed that. A tracer allowed researchers to estimate changes in regional blood flow, a rough map of which neighborhoods were demanding more oxygen and which had dimmed. It was not a mind-reading machine. It could not display sadness.exe, locate your childhood password, or explain why you opened the fridge and forgot your entire mission. It produced colored statistical maps that required careful comparison. Neuroscience had finally acquired weather radar and immediately had to resist naming every cloud the personality lobe. Psychiatrist Scott Rauch and colleagues ignored the obvious first use, finding the brain region responsible for replying "you too" when a waiter says "enjoy your meal," and asked a much sharper question: what changes when a person with post-traumatic stress symptoms is not merely remembering an event but re-experiencing it? The team worked with 8 participants. Each helped create 2 audio scripts. One described a neutral, safe routine. The other reconstructed sensory fragments of a traumatic event, images, sounds, physical sensations, and the sequence in which they returned. That distinction mattered. Ordinary autobiographical memory behaves like a story. Trauma can return like a folder somebody dropped down a staircase. Sound over here, image over there, terror rolling under the cabinet, and chronology standing at the top, insisting this was all organized 5 minutes ago. Inside the scanner, each participant heard the neutral script and the traumatic script. Heart rate and emotional state were monitored, while PET measured changes in regional cerebral blood flow. One participant in the study, Marcia, had lost her young daughter and unborn baby in a car crash 13 years earlier. When the recording brought her back to the accident, her heart raced and her blood pressure rose. The calendar said 13 years. Her body filed an objection. When the recording ended, she emerged shallow breathing, wide-eyed, and frozen. The researchers had obtained data, but the cost of obtaining it was sitting in front of them. That ethical weight belongs in the story. These were not colorful brain pictures generated by a clever demo. They came from people allowing science to observe their distress in the hope that it might help others. When the scans were combined and compared, the traumatic scripts produced increased blood flow in right-sided limbic, paralimbic, and visual regions. Activity decreased in parts of the left inferior frontal and middle temporal cortex. Translation: systems involved in alarm, emotion, and vivid visual re-experiencing clocked in for an emergency shift, while regions involved in language and organized interpretation quietly put up an out-of-office reply. One of those quieter areas was associated with the left inferior frontal language network, often discussed alongside Broca's area. Damage to this general network can impair the production of language. In the PET study, no tissue was damaged. The finding was a temporary change in activation during symptom provocation. That distinction matters. A flashback is not a stroke. But the scan offered a possible reason that extreme experience can become literally difficult to put into words. The alarm department had seized the building, and language was outside in the car searching for the correct visitor badge. This is the first major reveal. Speechless horror is not necessarily a refusal to speak. Sometimes the system that converts experience into ordered language is working with reduced support precisely when the experience becomes most intense. Meanwhile, visual regions became more active. A memory was not returning as a polite caption reading, "Bad event," previously occurred. It was arriving with pictures, surround sound, and the deeply unnecessary premium subscription. That helps explain why a smell, a face, a sound, or a physical position can trigger a response before a coherent story appears. The brain does not store every experience as one convenient video file. Components can be distributed across sensory, emotional, and contextual systems. Under trauma, fragments may return with the force of the present. The original study also reported a right-sided pattern in limbic and visual regions. Early explanations contrasted a more emotional, visual right hemisphere with a more linguistic, sequential left hemisphere. That is useful as a teaching sketch, but the modern brain is not two rival interns sharing one keyboard, one making spreadsheets, the other buying crystals. Both hemispheres cooperate in complex networks. The careful claim is narrower. During this experiment, the traumatic condition shifted activity toward right-sided emotion and visual systems, while activity fell in specific left-sided language-related regions. Still, the lived consequence is enormous. If sensory alarm is loud and contextual language is faint, then can feel like now. The person may understand intellectually that the danger is over. Their body may simultaneously prepare and appeal to the Supreme Court. This is where blame enters. A delayed reply, a slammed door, or burnt potatoes may become the apparent cause of an emotional storm. Suddenly, the potato is on trial for crimes it did not commit. But the present event may be only the match. The fuel was stored elsewhere. After the storm, a person can construct a public explanation, a cover story that makes behavior socially legible. Yet, a cover story is not always the same as an integrated memory. Integration means the sensory fragments, emotions, body response time, and language can occupy one account without the nervous system behaving as if narration itself is an emergency. That is why talk about it is both important and incomplete. Language can help organize experience, but insight alone does not automatically cancel an alarm response. Asking the rational brain to explain the emotional brain out of terror can resemble emailing a fire extinguisher, marking it urgent, and wondering why the kitchen remains enthusiastically on fire. The scan did not prescribe one perfect treatment. It offered a map of the problem. Researchers could investigate medication that reduces excessive adrenergic arousal. Therapists could work on desensitization and safe reprocessing. Later approaches could help patients notice bodily sensations without being overwhelmed and place the memory back in time. That was then, this is now, and that brings us to the question the scanner could not answer by itself. Why can someone know an event is over and still feel it happening now? Because traumatic remembering is not always an ordinary story retrieved from an archive. It can be a state that alarm systems activate, sensory fragments return vividly, the body mobilizes, and language-related organization becomes less available. The past does not merely get described. For a moment, parts of it get performed. That is also why the absence of a clean narrative does not prove the absence of an experience. The memory may be present in heart rate, posture, images, avoidance, and fragments long before it becomes a sentence. The first PET study was tiny, 8 participants, and its colorful maps were never a complete theory of trauma. 8 people is a study, not a population census, and definitely not permission to label every glowing pixel the trauma button. Later research has made the picture more networked, more variable, and less tidy, but the central insight survives the upgrade. A brain in a flashback is not simply choosing to think about the past, it is reorganizing around danger. Healing, then, is not winning an argument with yourself. It is helping the brain and body recognize time again, so an image becomes a memory, and an alarm becomes information, and the unspeakable event can finally acquire a past tense.